The grand hall of Velthara gleamed like a crystal hive, with walls of smooth silver and ceilings that shimmered with stars. The room was filled with voices, light, and the subtle hum of alien technologies. Delegates from across the galaxy had come together for the Unity Summit, a rare event where different species discussed peace, trade, and cooperation. Among them stood Commander Siraxa, tall and proud in her sharp, dark armor. Her skin glowed a soft violet under the halls, lights, and her eyes were sharp like twin blades. She was a warrior of the Zeleri, a species known for their strength, honor, and strict traditions. They believed in keeping their bloodlines pure and their emotions hidden. To the Zeleri, logic was law, and weakness was shame. Siraxa stood near, the high platform, arms crossed. Her sharp gaze swept over the gathering until it stopped at a human man standing alone. Captain Elias Ward. A representative from Earth had only recently joined the Galactic Union. He was average in size compared to the towering aliens around him, but there was something calm and steady in his presence. Dressed in a simple black uniform with silver stripes, Elias was not flashy. He did not look powerful, but he stood with quiet confidence, hands behind his back, listening carefully. A soft chuckle escaped Siraxa. "Is that one of the humans?" she whispered to her aide, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "I thought they would be more evolved." Her comment drew a few smiles from nearby delegates. Siraxa stepped forward, voice louder now. "Tell me, human," she said, "is it true that your kind still believes in emotional bonding? That you mate for love?" Elias turned toward her. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply nodded. "We do," he said calmly. "We believe love is strength." "Foolish," Siraxa said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "Attachment weakens the mind. It clouds judgment. The Zeleri have thrived for thousands of years by avoiding such distractions." "I've read about your species," Elias replied, still calm. "You are strong, disciplined, but strength without compassion often turns into cruelty." The room quieted. Siraxa's eyes narrowed, surprised by his reply. She had expected him to stumble or get angry, but instead he stood steady, like a mountain untouched by the wind. "You dare challenge a Zeleri in open council?" she asked, stepping closer. "I challenge no one," Elias said. "But I do. Speak truth. Humans may not be the strongest or the fastest, but we survive because we believe in each other. We protect those we love. That's not weakness. That's what keeps us alive." Some in the room nodded, others looked away. Siraxa felt something strange inside her chest, a mix of anger and curiosity. This human did not act like she expected. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, and he wasn't afraid. He was just honest. "Love is a human idea," Siraxa said sharply. "It has no place in war or diplomacy." "Perhaps," Elias said, "but it has a place in peace. That's why we're here, isn't it?" Before Siraxa could reply, the council bell rang. The session was ending. Delegates began to file out of the hall, their footsteps echoing softly across the shining floor. Siraxa stood frozen, watching the human as he turned and walked away. There was no smugness in his step, no pride, only quiet strength. Her aide leaned in. "He speaks well. For a human." Siraxa didn't answer. She was still thinking about what Elias had said. She had mocked him in front of the council, expecting an easy victory. Instead, he had answered with calm words that cut deeper than any weapon. She had always believed that humans were weak, ruled by emotions, fragile bodies, and chaotic systems. But now, a small seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. Perhaps there was more to them than she had thought. But she pushed the thought aside. Emotions were for the weak. She was Zalari, proud, logical, unshaken. As she left the grand hall, her gaze drifted once more toward the exit where Elias had disappeared. She would not see him again, she told herself. He meant nothing. She had no idea how wrong she was. The stars blinked brightly in the distance as the small fleet of ships traveled through the cold vacuum of space. The Unity Summit had concluded, and now several ships were returning to their respective planets. Among them was the Zalari vessel Sovereign's Reach, carrying Commander Siraxa back to Velthara. She sat alone in her private chamber, staring out at the blackness of space. The council session had been unsettling, and her thoughts were still swirling, though she had dismissed the human envoy, Captain Elias Ward, in front of the others. His words kept returning to her. His calmness, his belief in compassion, and most of all, his unwavering strength in the face of her mockery. But such thoughts were distractions. She was a warrior of the Zalari, and distractions had no place in her life. As much as she tried to silence the small voice in her mind, it kept growing louder, like an echo that refused to fade. Suddenly, the quiet hum of the ship was broken by an alarm. Red lights flashed as the ship's systems screamed out in warning. "Captain, we've been hit," shouted the officer from the communications console. Siraxa's heart skipped a beat as she stood up quickly. The ship shook violently as another explosion rocked the vessel. A deep rumbling vibrated through the walls. The Zalari were not easily rattled, but even Siraxa could feel the fear rising. "Activate shields! Get us out of here," she commanded. But before anyone could respond, the ship was rocked by another blast, this time much closer. Sparks flew from the consoles and the lights flickered. The floor beneath them buckled, and the walls groaned under the pressure. "Impact!" the officer shouted, barely holding onto his seat as the ship lurched. Siraxa gritted her teeth. They had no time to react. The ship began to break apart. Panels of the hull tore open, and a deafening roar filled the air as the ship lost control. Emergency escape pods were launching all around her, but the chaos was too much. "We need to leave, now!" Siraxa shouted. She barely managed to reach one of the escape pods before it was ejected into the cold void of space. Her heart pounded in her chest as the pod spiraled uncontrollably, the ship's massive frame still crumbling in the distance. The explosion sent them tumbling, far from the remains of the Sovereign's Reach. The pod's automated systems activated, bringing them slowly to a halt in a wild, unpredictable orbit around a nearby moon. The escape pod landed hard on the surface, skidding to a stop on the rough, rocky terrain. The sudden silence that followed the crash was almost more deafening than the chaos of the explosion. Siraxa's head swam as she groggily regained consciousness. She was alive. She had survived the blast. Slowly, she unstrapped herself from the seat, her body aching from the impact. She pulled herself to her feet, shaking her head to clear the fog from her mind. "Captain Ward," she called, her voice echoing in the small pod. She looked around, and there he was, lying on the floor, unconscious but alive. Elias had been seated across from her, and he had taken the brunt of the crash. She hurried to him, checking his pulse, a weak but steady rhythm. He was breathing. With a groan, Elias slowly opened his eyes. He blinked, confused, before locking eyes with Siraxa. "What happened?" he murmured. "We were attacked," Siraxa said, her voice tight. "We've crashed, but we're alive." He nodded slowly, pushing himself up into a sitting position. His eyes scanned the pod, then the window, where the barren surface of the moon stretched out before them. It was cold and desolate. No signs of life, just endless rock and dust. They were stranded, alone. "Can you walk?" Siraxa asked, her voice practical. Elias looked at his injured leg, which was bleeding slightly from a cut. "I think so," he replied, his tone steady. "We need to get out of here." Siraxa quickly moved to the pod's control panel and tried to assess their situation. The pod was intact, but communication systems were down. They couldn't call for help. Their only option was to survive. "Is there any chance of getting the ship back in the air?" Elias asked, trying to stand, wincing as he tested his leg. "No," Siraxa replied firmly. "The damage is too severe. We're stranded." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we need to make the best of it." Siraxa looked at him, a flicker of something in her eyes. She had expected him to panic, to show fear, but there was none of that. Elias was not flustered by the situation. He was calm, practical. It irritated her in a way. She was used to being the one who remained in control, yet this human seemed to handle chaos with ease. "Let's find shelter," she said, turning to the pod's hatch. "We need to assess the damage to the pod and find water." Elias followed her, still limping slightly. As they exited the pod, the cold wind hit them immediately, sharp and biting. The landscape before them was harsh, gray rocks, deep valleys, and dark shadows cast by the distant mountains. They were on a hostile world, but they were alive, and for now, that was enough. Siraxa looked at Elias, her eyes narrowing slightly. She had mocked him once. Now, she would have to rely on him if they were going to survive. The days following the crash were filled with challenges. Siraxa and Elias worked together to survive the harsh environment of the barren moon. The cold winds howled constantly, and the ground was rocky and uneven. They were stranded, far from any known civilization. Yet, despite the isolation and danger, something strange began to happen between them. Siraxa was used to handling difficult situations. She was trained to lead, to fight, to think quickly under pressure. But there was something different about this place. She had never felt so vulnerable, so small in the face of an entire planet's merciless elements. And Elias, though only human, had proven himself in ways that challenged everything she thought she knew about his species. Every day, they scavenged for food and water. The moon was dry and lifeless, but there were hidden sources of nourishment, strange plants that Siraxa had never seen before, but Elias had a talent for identifying and utilizing their properties. He was clever. He adapted quickly. He even began making small jokes to keep their spirits up, something that Siraxa had never thought a human would do in such a dire situation. His humor was dry, but it worked. It kept her focused, reminded her that she was not alone. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire they had managed to light with some flint, Siraxa found herself watching Elias. He was boiling water from a stream they had discovered earlier in the day. His movements were precise, practiced. He wasn't afraid. He didn't panic. He was calm, steady, and it annoyed Siraxa more than she would admit. "Do you ever get afraid?" she asked, breaking the silence between them. Elias didn't look up from the fire. "Sure," he said, his voice low. "But I've learned that fear doesn't help. It just slows you down." Siraxa frowned. "That's a strange way of looking at things." He shrugged. "It works for me, and it's the only way I've found to stay alive out here." Siraxa leaned back against a rock, crossing her arms. She studied him for a moment. "And what if you're wrong? What if fear is what keeps us alive?" Elias finally looked up at her, his eyes serious. "Then we learn. We adapt. But sitting around letting fear control you, that's when you die." Siraxa was quiet for a moment, considering his words. She had spent most of her life pushing her emotions aside, believing that fear and weakness had no place in her world. But Elias's perspective, it was different. She couldn't quite place it, but she felt something stirring within her, a flicker of curiosity, of understanding. "What were you like before you became a soldier?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Elias looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "Before I became a soldier?" "Yes. You don't just wake up one day and decide to be a warrior. What made you choose this path?" she pressed. He smiled slightly, as if amused by her question. Well, you might say it was a choice I made when I was younger. Growing up on Earth wasn't easy. There were a lot of challenges, a lot of hardship. My family, my friends, they all struggled to survive in a world full of dangers. Siraxa tilted, her head intrigued. And the army was the solution? At the time, it seemed like it. It gave me a purpose, something to fight for, he said quietly. But after a while, you realize that the battles aren't just external. The real fight is inside you. It's about finding peace with yourself. That's the hardest battle. Siraxa didn't respond immediately. She had never thought about it like that. For the Zalari, battle was a way of life, a means of proving strength, honor, and superiority. But Elias spoke as if he fought for something else, something deeper. The next day, as they ventured farther from their crash site to search for supplies, Siraxa found herself relying on him more and more. They shared tasks. He would scout ahead while she made shelter, and when it was time to rest, they would sit together, talking about anything and everything. She found it strange, how easy it had become. Before the crash, she had dismissed him so quickly, thinking him weak, unworthy. Now, she was beginning to realize how wrong she had been. There was a strength in him that she had never understood until now. As the days turned into weeks, Siraxa began to notice how their connection grew. It wasn't just their mutual survival that brought them closer. It was something more. They had both been forced into a situation that none of their training had prepared them for. Yet, together, they were making it work. Together, they were learning what it meant to trust each other. One evening, after a long day of trekking across the rocky landscape, Siraxa sat beside Elias at the fire again. They didn't speak at first, just watching the flames flicker and dance in the cold night air. But then Siraxa broke the silence. "You know, I never thought I would find myself here," she said quietly, "alone, with a human." Elias glanced at her. "What, you didn't think you'd end up stranded with a human?" he asked with a small grin. Siraxa's lips twitched in a slight smile. "No, I never thought I'd end up trusting one." Elias nodded, his expression softening. "Trust is earned, not given, and I think, by now, we've both earned it." She looked at him, feeling something inside her stir, a warmth, a connection. It was something she had never felt before, not in all her years as a warrior, not in all her time spent on battlefields. This was different. This was something far deeper. Siraxa realized then that something had changed between them. Something had shifted, and she wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew, without a doubt, that this human, this unexpected companion, was no longer just a fellow survivor. Elias had become something more to her, and for the first time in her life, Siraxa wondered if this bond, this connection, could change everything she thought she knew. The days on the moon had turned into weeks. Siraxa and Elias had created a routine, a life that, though difficult, was becoming more familiar with each passing day. They had found a place near the crash site, a small valley that provided shelter from the winds, and they had managed to secure a source of clean water from a deep cave system they discovered after a long search. Each day brought new challenges, but they met them together. The moon was a harsh world, cold nights and scorching days, but they were surviving. And in surviving, something strange was happening, something that neither of them had anticipated. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned deep purple, they sat by the fire sharing a simple meal they had prepared from the local plants and water they had managed to collect. Elias was smiling, telling one of his usual dry jokes, and Siraxa found herself laughing. Genuinely. Laughing for the first time in a long while. There was something easy about being with him, something comforting in the way he spoke to her, treated her as an equal despite all the differences between them. "Your laugh," Elias said, grinning. "It's different from what I imagined." Siraxa raised an eyebrow. Different? Yeah, he said. I don't know. It's lighter than I thought. I always imagined Zaleri would have this deep, serious laugh, like everything is a matter of life or death. Siraxa chuckled, shaking her head. We are serious people. We don't waste time on trivial things. But you're laughing now. That's not serious. Siraxa stopped for a moment, her smile fading slightly. She hadn't realized how much tension had always been with her, the weight of duty, the pressure of being the perfect commander, always in control, never letting her guard down. But here, in the cold wilderness, surrounded by nothing but the stars and the rocks, she felt free. Free from the expectations, free from the endless battles of her past. She felt lighter, and Elias was part of that. The night was growing colder. The fire crackled as Elias went to fetch more wood. Siraxa leaned back against a rock, staring at the sky. It was a clear night, and for the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to truly appreciate the beauty around her. The stars stretched out in every direction, their light cold and distant. It reminded her of how small she was in the grand scheme of things. She could hear Elias moving around in the distance, but something felt different. Something was shifting inside her. Something she couldn't ignore. Her body felt heavier than usual, her movements slower. She felt an odd sensation, a tightness in her chest. At first, she tried to brush it off as the fatigue of the past few weeks. But as the night went on, the feeling only grew stronger. By the time Elias returned, she was sitting up, her hand resting on her stomach. Her mind raced as she considered the possibility of what was happening. But the more she thought about it, the more undeniable the truth became. Elias sat beside her, placing the wood down, his brow furrowing when he saw the concerned look on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft. Siraxa looked at him, trying to mask her discomfort. "I don't know. Something feels off." "Off?" Elias repeated, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of injury or pain. She nodded slowly, her voice quiet. "I've been feeling strange, tired, a little nauseous. It could just be the stress of being here, but—" Elias raised an eyebrow, his expression softening with concern. "You think you might be sick?" "I'm not sure," Siraxa said, shaking her head. "But it's not a normal feeling. It's like something inside me is changing." He reached out, placing a hand on her arm. The simple gesture was enough to send a wave of warmth through her. For a moment, she felt a strange connection, an unspoken bond that seemed to tie them together in that instant. "You've been through a lot. We both have," Elias said gently. "Maybe it's just the stress, the situation, or maybe it's something else." Siraxa looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered his words. She had been through much: the crash, the survival, the endless struggle to adapt to a new and unforgiving world. But this feeling inside her was different. She could feel it, deep down, and it wasn't just fatigue. "I need to rest," she said, standing up slowly, her hand still on her stomach. Elias nodded, though his concern was clear in his eyes. "I'll stay. Close. Let me know if you need anything." That night, Siraxa lay awake in her makeshift shelter, staring up at the stars. Her mind raced, her body still heavy with an unfamiliar sensation. There was no logical explanation for what she was feeling. No reason why her body seemed to be betraying her. The next morning, when the sun rose over the distant mountains, Siraxa felt even stranger. The tightness in her chest had not gone away. She felt dizzy, weak, and yet there was something else, a strange warmth, a spark that she could not explain. She knew that she couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had changed inside her. Elias was up before her, preparing breakfast. But when he saw her face, he immediately stopped. "You're not okay, are you?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Siraxa shook her head. I don't know. Something is wrong, Elias. I think I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. She had no idea how it had happened or why, but in that moment, she realized the truth. She was carrying his child. Elias looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to understand what she was saying. And then, without a word, he walked over and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "I don't know what this means either," he said softly, "but I'll be here for you, whatever comes next." Days passed since Siraxa had first felt the strange, undeniable shift inside her. The tightness in her chest had not gone away, and now, with the reality of what she had discovered, the situation had become more urgent. She was pregnant. But how? She had no explanation and no way to explain it. Zalari biology was not like human biology. Their reproduction was precise, controlled. There was no room for error. But here she was, in a foreign world, carrying a human child. Elias had insisted that they get to the bottom of it. He had looked at her with more concern than Siraxa was used to seeing from him. She had been strong, self-sufficient, and relied on logic and control for most of her life. Yet now, she was faced with a situation that defied logic. She couldn't explain it. Elias had built a small camp near their shelter, creating a makeshift laboratory with what little they had. His knowledge of survival and biology, though not as advanced as that of the Zalari, was impressive. He had found ways to analyze their surroundings, identify plant life, and even experiment with basic medical techniques. "What do you think?" Elias asked, his voice quiet as he observed Siraxa from across the small camp. His gaze was gentle, as though he was unsure whether to push or back off. Siraxa ran a hand through her silver-blue hair, feeling the weight of his concern. The moon had been their home for weeks now, and though she had become accustomed to the harshness of the land, the unpredictability of this new life was unsettling. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice strained. "The tests are inconclusive. Zalari and human biology shouldn't mix, and yet—" Elias stepped closer, a gentle smile on his lips. "I know you don't want to talk about it, but you don't have to face this alone, Siraxa. We'll figure this out together." Siraxa's gaze flickered to him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of his words. She had never expected to form such a bond with a human. Her entire species had always viewed them as weak, unpredictable. She had laughed at the idea of mating with one. And now she was carrying his child. The thought unsettled her, but Elias' presence gave her comfort. He had stood by her through every challenge. He had helped her build their shelter, find food, and protect her from the dangers of the moon. And now, when everything felt uncertain, he was still here, offering support. "I never imagined this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I've spent my life serving my people, leading them, fighting for them. I never imagined that I would end up here, like this." Elias sat beside her, a gentle but steady presence. "Life doesn't always go according to plan. I learned that a long time ago." She looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She had always believed that everything had a purpose, that there was a reason behind every action. But now, this unexpected turn in her life had thrown everything she thought she knew into doubt. "We should try to figure out what's happening inside you," Elias said. "I know we don't have the medical technology we're used to, but we can still try. There might be something we can do." Siraxa nodded, though she still felt uneasy. "If there is any way to understand what is happening, we will find it. I am not afraid of the unknown. But this," she gestured to herself, "this is beyond me." Elias stood up, moving to his makeshift lab. "I'm going to try something. It might give us some answers." He took a few instruments and began. His work, measuring, testing, and documenting every result. Siraxa watched him closely, impressed with his resourcefulness. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to her own rising uncertainty. The hours passed slowly, and as evening fell, Elias returned to Siraxa's side. "I've got some answers," he said, his voice serious, "but they're not easy to hear." Siraxa, stiffened. "What do you mean?" Elias sighed, kneeling beside her. "The biological processes at work in your body are unlike anything I've seen before. It's not just a mix of human and Zolari cells. It's something new, something we didn't expect. The process is fast, faster than normal gestation. The child is growing at an accelerated rate. I can't say what will happen next, but—" Siraxa blinked, her heart skipping a beat. "An accelerated rate? How long do I have before—" "Before what?" Elias asked, his voice gentle. "Before the child is born? It could happen soon, but we don't know for sure. This is uncharted territory, Siraxa. But one thing is clear. You're not alone in this." She stared at him, her mind racing. She had never faced something so unpredictable. Her entire life had been about control, about certainty. And now, this was beyond her. "Do you want to be alone?" Elias asked, his voice soft. "I mean, I can't know what you're feeling, but you don't have to go through this alone." Siraxa didn't know how to respond. A part of her wanted to push him away, to deny the connection she felt with him. She was strong. She was a commander. She didn't need anyone's help. But then she looked at him, the human who had been her companion in this strange, desolate place, and realized the truth. She needed him, more than she had ever needed anyone before. "I don't want to be alone," she said quietly, her voice filled with vulnerability she rarely showed. Elias smiled, reaching out to touch her arm, lightly. "Then we'll face this together. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out." Siraxa looked at him, her heart conflicted. She wasn't sure what the future held or how their lives would change in the coming days. But, for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't facing this unknown journey alone, and that, more than anything else, gave her the strength she needed to keep going. The weeks that followed Elias' discovery were filled with uncertainty. The child, growing. Inside, Siraxa was a constant reminder of the unusual situation they found themselves in. With each passing day, Siraxa could feel the changes within her body, the warmth of new life, the growing pulse of something far beyond her understanding. The accelerated development of the child made her anxious, but it also gave her a strange sense of purpose. This was uncharted territory, not just for her, but for both species. What did it mean for the future? What would their child be like? Elias had become her steady anchor in the storm. His calm presence gave her a sense of stability in a world that was anything but stable. He didn't have all the answers, but he never stopped searching for them. Together, they continued to adapt to their environment, working in tandem as they faced the challenges of their new life on the moon. Their bond, once born out of necessity, was now growing stronger with each day. One day, as they ventured farther, from their camp to search for resources, Elias noticed that Siraxa was moving slower than usual. Her steps were heavier, and there was a look of discomfort on her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Siraxa paused and looked at him, her brow furrowing. "I feel strange. The child, it's growing faster than I expected. My body is not used to this." Elias stepped closer, studying her carefully. "Maybe you need to rest for a while. We've been working hard every day. You should take it easy." Siraxa shook her head. "I can't. We need to gather more food. We need to survive. The moon. It doesn't care if we're tired." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "I know this isn't easy, but your health is important. We can't help the child if you push yourself too hard. She hesitated, but then nodded. "You're right. I will rest for a while." They found a sheltered area, a small alcove between two rock formations. The wind had died down and the temperature was bearable. Siraxa sat down, her back against the stone, and closed her eyes. Elias unpacked their supplies and started a small fire, the warm light flickering in the quiet evening. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer awkward or tense. In the beginning, Siraxa had resisted their growing connection, but now it felt natural. Elias had become more than just her companion in survival. He was someone she trusted, someone she could rely on in ways she never thought possible. As the fire crackled, Elias glanced at Siraxa, who was resting with her eyes closed. Her brow was furrowed, and there was a slight frown on her lips. He knew she was struggling. She was strong, fierce, and proud, but there was something about this situation that was breaking down her walls. It was something Elias had been silently grateful for. The fact that Siraxa was allowing herself to rely on him. "We'll get through this," Elias said quietly, his words more for himself than for her. "I don't know what the future holds, but we're doing everything we can." Siraxa opened her eyes and looked at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "You always say that. We'll get through this." "I don't know if you believe it, but I think you do." Elias shrugged, offering a small smile in return. "I don't know what's ahead either, but I believe in us. You've proven you can survive anything. I've seen it, and I've learned a lot from you. We're in this together, Siraxa." Her heart softened at his words. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of their situation. But there was something more, something deeper. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, and it was because of him, because of Elias. "I didn't think I'd ever be here. Like this," Siraxa said after a long pause. "I never imagined a human would have such an impact on my life." Elias looked at her, his expression sincere. "I didn't expect to end up stranded on a moon with an alien either. But here we are, and we're making it work. We'll figure it out." Siraxa met his gaze, something warm in her chest, something she couldn't quite define. It wasn't just appreciation. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more, something that had grown between them as they faced the unknown together. And as much as Siraxa tried to deny it, she couldn't deny the truth. She was beginning to care for him in ways she never thought possible. Later that evening, as they sat together watching the stars, Elias spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said. "Once we get back to your home world, or whatever happens next, we'll need to figure out what to tell people. I don't know what they'll think about all this. The child, us." Siraxa remained silent for a moment, contemplating his words. "It will be difficult. The Zalari don't understand humans. They see them as weak, as inferior. If they find out about this, about the child, it could mean trouble." "But you'll fight for it, right?" Elias asked, his voice soft but determined. "You'll fight for your child, for us." Siraxa met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know what I'll be facing, but I will protect my child, Elias, and I will protect you." Elias nodded, his eyes full of conviction. "We'll face whatever comes together. Whatever happens, we're not alone anymore." As the fire burned low and the night deepened, they sat in silence, the bond between them growing stronger. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since the crash, Siraxa felt that perhaps it wasn't so frightening. They had each other, and that, in itself, was enough to give her hope. The days had turned into weeks, and the strange, new world Siraxa and Elias had found themselves in was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a home, a place where, despite the odds, they were building something that neither of them had expected. As the weeks passed, the pregnancy was progressing rapidly. Siraxa could feel it now more than ever. The child was growing faster than any Zalari child should, and the process was both a mystery and a miracle. Siraxa woke early one morning to find Elias already up, as usual, preparing their makeshift camp. The sky outside the shelter was still dark, but the light of distant stars painted the world in a soft glow. The air was cool, but the warmth of their fire was enough to make the morning feel manageable. "How are you feeling?" Elias asked, turning to look at her as she sat up, rubbing her eyes. There was a hint of concern in his voice, the same gentle tone he had used every day since they realized the child was coming. "I feel strange today," Siraxa said, standing up slowly, her hand instinctively resting on her abdomen. "There is a weight I cannot explain. It is different from before." Elias raised an eyebrow, setting aside the task he was working on. "Should we get you to rest? We can stay here today." "No," Siraxa said, shaking her head. "We cannot wait. I feel it is time. The child will come soon. I can feel it." The words hung in the air between them. There was no doubt now that Siraxa was preparing to give birth. Despite everything that had happened, everything that was still uncertain, they had arrived at this point. And now, with the baby's birth imminent, their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could have imagined. The following hours were a flurry of activity. Elias, ever the resourceful one, quickly began organizing their supplies to ensure they were ready. He had learned enough about survival from their time on the moon to know that a childbirth in this environment would not be easy. He wanted everything to be perfect. Siraxa, despite her strength, was finding it difficult to hide the mix of emotions running through her. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, but now, as she felt the unmistakable signs of labor, she realized just how much she depended on Elias. He sat beside her, holding her hand as she went through the first waves of pain. His presence was steady, calming. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His quiet support was enough. Siraxa could feel the connection between them growing stronger in that moment, something she could no longer deny. The hours seemed to stretch on, but slowly, bit by bit, Siraxa's breathing steadied. Elias stayed by her side, refusing to leave. The whole time, he spoke softly to her, reminding her to breathe and stay calm. Even when the pain became nearly unbearable, Siraxa held on, knowing that she was not alone. Eventually, the moment came, the moment that had seemed so distant only, a few short weeks ago. The child, this unexpected result of two vastly different species, was finally entering the world. Elias stood by her side, his hands steady and reassuring, his eyes filled with awe and wonder. With one final push, the child was born. Siraxa let out a sharp breath as the world around her seemed to shift. She looked down, her heart pounding in, her chest, to see a small, delicate figure in Elias' arms. The child was a mix of both human and Zalari features. A small, peaceful face with human-like eyes, but the skin had the faintest glow of Zalari genetics. Siraxa felt a strange pull in her chest as she gazed at the baby. This was her child, their child, a new beginning. Elias, who had been focused entirely on Siraxa's safety and the child's well-being, now looked at the baby in his arms. His expression softened, and for the first time, Siraxa saw a deep sense of wonder in his eyes. "It's incredible," Elias said, his voice filled with awe. "She's perfect." Siraxa reached out, gently brushing her fingers against the child's face. Her heart was full, and for the first time since they had crashed on this lonely moon, she felt truly at peace. This was her new reality now. She was a mother, and, in some way, she was no longer alone. The baby let out a small cry, its tiny hands grasping weakly at the air before settling back into Elias's arms. Siraxa couldn't help but smile at the sight. The baby's arrival had changed everything. The future, once uncertain and terrifying, was now filled with promise. She had never expected this life, never imagined that a human and a Zalari could create something so beautiful. Elias turned his attention back to Siraxa. "You're amazing," he said softly. "You did it." She shook her head slightly, her eyes never leaving the child. "We did it. Together." In the days that followed, their bond grew even stronger. The child, a girl, became a symbol of everything they had overcome, the impossible, the unexpected, and the undeniable truth that they had built something new. Siraxa knew that she couldn't predict what the future would bring, but she also knew that she was no longer alone. They had each other, and they had the child that would bridge the gap between their two worlds. Siraxa found herself watching Elias as he cared for their daughter. She had once thought of humans as weak, but now she saw a strength in Elias that she had never imagined. The way he cared for their daughter, the way he supported her, it was a strength unlike any she had ever known. It made her realize just how much she had come to rely on him. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the future. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. As they looked at the stars that night, Siraxa and Elias knew that their journey was far from over, but no matter what challenges they would face them together. And, with Yin, their daughter, by their side, they had everything they needed to build a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of something new.